Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, the inventor of the all-colour zebra crossing. And today we're going to be talking about a brand new musical which is coming to London in April. It's called The Universal Machine. Now, that name might be a bit of an enigma, and that is a clue, because this musical is a new musical about the life and death of Alan Turing. And you may know Alan Turing as, well, he's one of the fathers of the modern computer. He's one of the great code breakers at Bletchley Park in the Second World War. And he, of course, was a famous homosexual in the first half of the 20th century and regrettably was persecuted for his sexuality in those very difficult days of the 1950s when society was extremely repressive, on both sides of the Atlantic, we should say, which ultimately led to his death in 1954, although there are questions about how he met his end. These are questions that are addressed in this brand new musical. It's by David Byrne, who's the writer and director, and it has music by Dominic Brennan. Intrigued by the concept of this new musical, I went to speak to David at the new Diorama Theatre, which is a lovely new theatrical venue up at Euston Way in North London, to find out more about the piece. So I hope you'll enjoy this fascinating conversation, which talks about the development of the musical, how the musical is continually changing, and how best to address the issue of covering a full life in a musical show. Musical Talk.
Hello, my name's Dave Byrne. I'm the book writer and co-lyricist and director for Universal Machine.
Now, the Universal Machine's a new musical, I think.
Yes.
And it's about the life of Alan Turing.
Yes.
Who, I think at least in Britain, is identified as one of the great fathers of computers, famous as one of the code breakers in the Second World War down at Bletchley Park.
That's correct.
But does that lend itself to a musical? How did the Universal Machine come to be?
Well, Alan Turing's always been on my list of productions. I've got my own company called Pitt, and we normally produce 1 or 2 shows a year in a variety of different forms. And Alan Turing's always been on the slate of something we'd like to look at. And this being this part of the centenary year, Alan would have been 100 at the moment, all the way through to, I think, about June, July. We thought this was the perfect opportunity to sort of turn it into a reality and sort of make it into a production. Plus, we had published the fact we were interested in doing it, and we were getting a lot of interest in it before we'd even started.
Really? From where?
We published the business plan of the new Diorama Theatre, which is the theatre I'm also artistic director of, and we published that we were going to be doing it in 2015, 2016, and I must have had about 30 or 40 emails from people. I mean, it was buried deep in this document, and I thought, well, if we don't do it soon, someone else might take it from us.
Right.
So we thought we'd better get cracking on it.
So what were the expressions of interest? Just generally from people saying that sounds like a good idea? Or people saying,
for a few producers, people saying, I'd like to play Alan. Lots of people saying, I'd like to play Alan. The amount of emails I've had from people sort of sending them, people you can tell trying to sort of pose themselves. Also from producers, other venues who were interested in sort of talking about maybe taking it or sort of working with us on it.
So a whole range of interest already.
Yeah, really amazing.
And that's quite unusual, isn't it?
Very unusual.
Yes.
Normally when people put on theatre, people are politely disinterested.
Yes. Not even politely.
Not even politely. Yeah. So I thought, well, there might be something really interesting here. It's a fascinating story, and all the work we've ever done as Pitt has been based on real life events or true stories. So it seemed to really lend itself to that. And as you say, a lot of people know little bits about him, but not the entire picture. And there is a huge amount in his life, to his personality, to his relationships, that people aren't entirely aware of.
I mean, let's be honest, most people will know what they know about Alan Turing probably from Breaking the Code.
Yes.
Which was a big stage play in the 90s.
Yeah, 80s, 90s.
Oh, was it 80s?
Yeah, 80s.
And featuring Derek Jacobi.
I think I've got a copy here. I was going to tell you exactly when Breaking the Code was. Yeah, it was 80s, I think, 1980 something. Oh, wow. Yes. even earlier. So
and
which
appeared on television. There was a television adaptation.
There was.
Also featuring Derek Jacobi and Prunella Scales as his mother.
Yes, which is available on YouTube.
Ah, is it?
So if anyone listening wants to go and watch it, you can give it a Google.
And in a sense, I think Alan Turing's name was known mostly in his scientific sense, but that was the one that started to flesh out the story for him, I think, and that's mostly how people will know of Alan Turing if they know of Alan Turing at all.
Yes.
What have you brought to it yourself?
Well, Breaking the Code, as you say, is the big piece of sort of dramatic telling of his story, and it's a wonderful
the text.
Yeah, it's the text. It's a wonderful play. It's a little dry in places, and I think it focuses a lot on his sexuality, which I think is very natural with a piece about a gay man who was persecuted for that later on. But there's so much more to him than that, and that seems to be very much the centre of gravity around. Even the title "Breaking the Code" is an allusion to sort of breaking the code of morals in that society. And when Alan was arrested for his homosexuality,
which was in the 50s.
In the 50s, yes, and chemically castrated, he wrote a letter where he said, that Turing thinks machines can think, Turing lies with men, therefore machines can't think. The idea that his arrest and his sexuality would overshadow his work in the 50s in a very negative way, that people wouldn't want to be associated with him. But I think we've almost come full circle, that I think in many ways it eclipses his work because of that, because he died because of his sexual orientation and because of the great tragedy of that. And I think that's mostly what people know. They know that the people say, oh, he's the one who broke the Enigma code, which isn't true. No. And he's the one who was gay. Yes. And I think compared to the huge amount of work that he did and the really interesting life that he had, I think that's a bit of a travesty. So we said, well, okay, we would really like to do a piece that covered the entire life, right from his early school days all the way through to his sort of time at Manchester, and then really explore his death and the circumstances surrounding it and the impact on his various relationships, and see how we bring that together. And we really didn't want it to be a musical. I can't stress it enough.
Really?
When you're putting together plays, especially in the way that we do, it's always about content and form coming together and matching, and that the theatrical conceit of the piece that you want to get across matches how you stage it.
Yes.
And we wanted to stage a piece about a man who was somehow out of sync with the time he was in. People said there was something of the future and of the past about him. And while he had these incredible ideas, and at the time they were philosophy, computers didn't exist at all. We would come to stage, the scenes where he first was talking about it in his Cambridge days, and they would have been doing it by gas lamp. We can't express, and there was no electricity even at Cambridge at that time, so to express how far on those thought thinkings were. And also a man who, while he had these incredible thoughts, had real problems communicating with people around him and sort of articulating things that most of us would find completely normal. So it seemed obvious.
Socially awkward.
Yes. And to find a way that the world around him was more erudite and more easy, it seemed really simple that we choreographed the whole piece. And it is a piece of choreography that he just can't quite sink in with. And to express people being able to express themselves easier, song seemed really natural. And it seemed the most heightened way of being able to demonstrate that.
So let me just clarify this. So, because this is really fascinating, you seem to be suggesting that in order to show his social dislocation, it's all through movement in the first instance, and then a natural progression from movement is music and songs.
Yes.
Is that how it sort of came to be?
That's how this has come to be.
So I'm not going to say through dance, but through movement first. Yeah. Now, that's a really interesting theatrical approach to almost anything, because I think movement is, if you like, the forgotten art in a lot of theatre, whether it be musical or otherwise.
Yeah, it's got to be. We really wanted the people around him and the world he's in to feel sort of fluid, and because his life had a really interesting trajectory, as we're learning. At Sherborne, it's a very sporty school,
which is his
when he was younger, and incredibly athletic. And he was incredibly athletic. What he wasn't so good at were the team sports. Seemingly, there's illustrations of him, I think, playing rounders when he's sort of staring at the grass and the sort of flowers growing rather than sort of joining in. He was an incredibly accomplished long distance runner, but he was
a solitary sport successful.
A solitary sport rather than group sports. And then he was at Cambridge, at King's, which is the most progressive of the colleges. He was there at the same time as a lot of the sort of big thinkers of his generation, but again was sort of separate from them and didn't really know how to quite engage with them. And then he went to Bletchley, where suddenly everyone understood him and they were running to catch up with him. And obviously later in his life, when his arrest and sort of the trial and his security clearance being taken away, and again he sort of falls out of sync as they no longer sort of need him. And it seemed like, well, to find a way of physically showing that on stage seems the natural to do it, because it's all about his relationship with the people around him. And then if they're going to sort of be moving in that sort of way and they need to sort of express themselves emotionally, we need to find a way of doing that, and obviously song is the theatrical form of it. So I think that's how it sort of came about. I desperately tried to find other ways of doing it, but it just seems so natural. When people hear you're doing a musical band, I mean, Stephen Fry tweeted about it a little while ago, and the reactions were incredibly varied. People saying this sounds really exciting, to other people going, how the hell are they going to turn that into a musical? And me sitting at my desk thinking,
that's a good question.
I still don't know. But I think when people imagine musical, they imagine sort of can dancers and big show, which are musicals that I've never really seen. I don't know. People keep saying it's not a natural subject for a musical, but what is a natural subject for a musical?
Yeah, but people say a lot of things about musicals.
Exactly.
I mean, the number of people I met in the world who say, I don't like musicals, but then when you press them, you discover they've only seen 3 or 4, and the 3 or 4 they've seen they quite like. What they mean is they think that it's quite often men, and I think there's sometimes a sense that some men will say, I don't want to see musicals because they're not sufficiently manly, which is an odd thing to attribute to any form of theatre, in my view.
I think most people imagine musicals to be a bit like the sort of Planet of the Apes musical in The Simpsons. I mean, that seems to be the place where that lives.
Or and Streetcar Named Desire, yes.
Again, but as presented in The Simpsons.
Because they're spoofs, in fact. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's people completely understand, the theatre is a great way of communicating stuff across. It's a very human experience. People completely understand that music is absolutely hardwired into us emotionally. And you can say so much through music, and you can bring in so much subtext and so much beauty. But yet when you combine them together, it automatically is. I think it's because often people who make musicals are people that don't really like music and aren't very good at theatre.
Yes.
That's completely opening myself up.
No, but in some cases, of course.
But
I think people also, sorry to interrupt you there, people also forget that musical theatre is theatre. It's a subset of theatre. It's not something different. It is the same. And people forget that a lot, I think. Do carry on.
It's also incredibly difficult to pull off well. I mean, as someone sort of leading this process through, you're very out of control for a long period as to what you're going to get, because you're working with so many other people in the room, and there are so many plates spinning. I mean, we're 2 weeks into rehearsal now, and we still don't know whether it's going to be amazing or a complete car crash. You just don't know. You have your idea that you sort of set out with, and obviously that's true in any piece of theatre, but you're never quite as out of the driving seat as you are in a musical until the very last minute, where the director's job is literally just sew it all together and make it work, and sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't.
So the rewards, because the risk is amplified, so are the rewards, I find.
Yeah. What's brilliant about the form of musical theatre, which is great for this show particularly, is you can condense so well. I mean, in a play, if you wanted, a man and woman to fall in love, you would have to show them meeting, and then, you'd have to show other scenes of them getting to know each other. And in a musical, you can do it in 3 minutes.
In a song.
It's completely believable, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those songs, that tells a story, and because the audience can be taken through those emotions through the power of music and sort of the sound of musical instruments sort of resonating with us, and the condension of lyrics and how sparse you can be, it means that when you're portraying something like a big life story, I mean, if we were doing this as a play, it would probably have to be about 9 hours long, because we'd have to show everything. But because we're not, you can get those relationships set up very, very quickly. And there's a lot of that in Alan's life. I mean, a lot of his relationships were very short. His first major relationship, apart from with his mother, was with a friend he was at school with, Christopher Morecambe, who he completely hero worshipped. And, I mean, he said in the letters, he wrote to Christopher's mother in the end, that he worshipped the ground he walked on. And he was completely, obsessed by him. He made everyone else seem so ordinary.
A schoolboy pash.
It was, I think. There's been a lot written about Alan and Christopher's relationship. Christopher died a year after they sort of met, just before they were
still at school.
Still at Sherborne. I think in that era there was. I mean, you get a lot of that in literature through Brideshead, through everything else. There's intense young male relationships where they sort of pour everything into each other, especially when there's that sort of real click. And I think it was partly that, but they only knew each other for a very brief period of time. And music is a perfect way of being able to represent that. Later on in his life, Alan's engaged to a woman at Bletchley Park, a lady called Joan Clark, who's the only other female.
Joan Clark of Bletchley Park.
Exactly.
These lyrics are writing themselves.
I feel we've missed a great lyrical chance there. But they were engaged for very short period of time. And music's great,
Yeah.
because you can jump in, you can show these relationships through, and you can find a way of making that work.
But it's such an interesting twist, isn't it? Because also we think of gay men being not being interested in women, but of course bisexuality is a spectrum.
Yes.
And also there's also social conventions and norms. So
Yes.
in itself, that's a very interesting spur on an understood life,
Yeah.
which makes it more interesting anyway.
Yeah, he came
so
out to
narratively,
her as
Well,
part
did
of
he
his
now?
proposal.
Well, Kenneth Williams did much the same.
Yes, and totally understood. I mean, I think it was something that they thought they both could get something out of.
Yeah.
I mean, Joan was exceptionally clever. She was his cipher, and he used to explain things to her because she understood it. And then because she understood everyone else, she was able to explain it to them. She was really his megaphone for his ideas of
Ah, how interesting.
and she was made a grade linguist, which was the only way they could pay her the same as the men. But she spoke no languages. She used to put name Joan Clark, position grade linguist, languages none.
But you say that because she spoke Turing.
Yes.
It's interesting. You were talking about this whole thing about his being able or not to plug into a social
Yeah.
milieu, and it seems to me that even in this area where he was able to fit, he still had to have some kind of adapter.
Yes, and she was able to sort of provide him with that. And what a musical does is gives us an incredible way of being able to weave in and out of that without having to either do it seemingly in real time and you'd feel these are very short, or having to overextend them and overemphasize them. So it's been a really handy form. I mean, the musical form is incredibly elastic, and it suits something like this really well. It also means that you can bring resonance back very easily. You can refer, because Christopher's relationship happened at the beginning of his life, really, about halfway in, actually, because he died so young, but very early on, but influenced everything he did ever since.
Yes, it's a formative.
Yes, and in a play you would have to find ways of bringing that back, or it could be quite clumsy. With music you can do it so
The
quick.
reprise.
The
I
reprise.
believe.
But even without singing, you
Yeah.
can bring it back, and I knew music needed to absolutely be a part of it. Also, there's a lot of music in his life. Christopher and Alan used to go to gramophone club together, a scene that we don't have in the piece. It's slightly too obvious, I thought. But,
This is because it's essentially sort of the first 20 years of the 20th century, isn't it? Where
Yes.
gramophone clubs would be modern and
quite hip.
absolutely.
Yes,
yes,
Music Maker. And was Music Maker even around in the 20s?
The NME, you mean, or the magazines?
Though there used to be something. Was it Melody Maker?
A melody making.
Was
yes.
that's the magazine, or pamphlet, I suppose it would have
HMV
been.
Review, perhaps.
Yes, back then. But there really did seem to be something there. And I thought, actually, we can do this through music. We've got a great composer who's working on it, who isn't a musical theatre composer, really, at all. In fact, he hasn't seen very many musicals. Again, when you impress him, though, things like Rocky Horror, his favourite film as a child. His name's Don Brennan. He's in the band Night Engine, who are doing
right?
incredibly well at the moment. They've just come off tour with the Kaiser Chiefs, and they're one of the bands to watch this year. He couldn't come in the other day because they were recording their new single, and they keep doing things like live lounges with Radio 1. He's the coolest man I know. He's
And well above any coolness that I'm aware of. So
yeah, I mean, he's stratospheric. He loves theatre, though. He clearly loves it, and he's been brilliant to work with.
So how would you describe? I mean, this is a very loosely worded question. So
I know I'm not going to know the answer. to
I'm
that.
expecting a loosely worded answer. How would you describe the music that you've heard so far, very broadly? I mean, is it going to be a rock musical? Is it going to be traditional musical theatre? Is it going to feel like it's New York? Is GNS? I mean, where? Or is it a bit of everything? Or
What I love is it doesn't sound like anything else.
Good.
I go and see a lot of new musicals, and they either sound a bit Sondheim-y, or a bit Jason Robert Brown. Recently, there's been a lot of that.
Yes.
Or there's been quite a lot of like Lloyd Webber, sort of the lushness of that.
Operetta.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like anything else.
Good.
At the moment, they may change that. We've got a band of three, but two of them are also ensemble. So we've got keyboard and two violins.
Interesting combination already.
Yes, very interesting. It's not so romantic sort. It's quite fun, and it's really varied. There's sort of comic songs, there's sort of sad songs. It really sort of does the full remit. As we start off, we start in a very natural sound, and as we get further on, it becomes more sort of early 19th century synthesizers. Which is very, because I hadn't heard things like prepared piano and stuff that I hadn't heard before, that he's really gone all in with. So as the show gets more technologically advanced, so does the music. So it sort of follows him through.
Very interesting.
So the stuff really early on, so when they're sort of playing their sport and when, Alan's mother's packing up to go away and travelling around the world, it's very natural. But at Bletchley Park, as they're building the bomb, which was Alan's first computer, it becomes much, much more technical and built and layered. And
what a nice parallel. That's very clever. I like that.
Yeah. So I think that's very exciting to see how that's going to pay off. But it's been wonderful. I mean, it sounds really great. I've been very happy with it. Every day we get sort of slightly closer to where it is. We're rewriting some songs at the moment just to get them just right. The big difficulties have been making Alan, where or if Alan should sing. And that's been the hard bit for us, and the bit we haven't quite.
So is it a musical that revolves around him and without him singing, which shows up the dislocation again socially,
yes.
Or does he, because it's his story,
yeah.
need
he
to?
Does need,
that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, and a question we don't yet have a complete answer to. I know he needs to try and sing in parts, and he needs a moment towards the end where we're inside the head more. And the actor playing Alan has got a very good singing voice.
Oh, yeah.
That they're all saying to me, "You've got to get him to sing." And I was like, "I know I've got to get him to sing at some point. We've got to find a way of making that work." And while obviously he does join in with the group things, we need to find moments where he can where people can really get inside his head. What's wonderful about the actor playing him is you can really scan him for what he's thinking, which is something you can't really teach. I mean, some actors seem to have it.
You mean they portray who they are and what they're playing on their face?
Yes. And which is glorious.
So ironically, he's no enigma.
He is no. Well, I think what it means is because a lot of people coming to it will have preconceptions of who Alan Turing is, and what this means is that everyone watching it will have their own Alan, and that they will be able to pick out what they want and what they would like to see. I think there's sort of a reflection there, and I think there are universal themes in this. I think everybody feels slightly apart from the sort of whirling world they're in every so often. I think everyone feels confused sometimes about where they're going. I think everyone's experienced that sort of first love that they sort of had that they've never quite moved on from, and I think everyone's had that sort of stuff. I think everyone's had great success and sort of great failures. I think there are lots of things in there, and I think by having Alan as the sort of still centre of a world which at that point was whirring. I mean, we start off in really early 19th century and go through to the sort of 50s.
20th century, I hope.
Yeah, 20th century, yes.
He didn't live that long.
He's about 400 years old.
He was there before Babbage.
Yes, there's a huge amount happened during that 50 years.
Yes, I should say. I mean, forgive me, the first 50 years of the 20th century are some of the most tumultuous in history.
Yes.
I don't just mean in terms of war either, but in technological advancement and social advancement and everything, yes.
Everything happened.
Yeah.
It was a very different country.
Well, it forged the world we're living in today, actually.
Yeah. And he was... People say of Oscar Wilde, that... I don't know, he said of himself, I think, actually, that the reason there is so much fascination in him is he embodied all of the excesses and the things of the age, and I think Alan Turing sort of does the same, but slightly out of sync. The fact that he was thinking about machinery and people just before we all got there, and then later in his life was thinking about how nature was planned.
He was a zoologist and biologist.
Yes, he was. Yes. Yeah, his work in morphogenesis was about how he could basically about patterns in nature and how nature applied itself in mathematical patterns, and how clearly there was a master plan of some sort that everything was abiding by. So he started off by thinking. His children's books,
which could be described as God in the Machine, if you want to take it that way.
That's exactly it. I mean, the universal machine, which the show is named after, is his idea that one day we will create a machine that will do everything, and ultimately we are the universal machine as people. He saw us all as machines. Even his children's books, which we have in the show, talk about the body being like a machine, like a steam engine, and that was really heretical at that point, because obviously they were very. I mean, religion was much more of an influence over everything than it is now, and science wasn't quite there with the answers. And all the way through to him to school and sort of Cambridge doing these sort of universal machine works. Then in the Second World War, what Alan's biggest achievement was, there were many during the Second World War, was speeding things up, using machinery to do things that humans couldn't do, creating the first mechanical brain, and then going on to saying, well, okay, well, we can make machines to be like us, and then realising, well, actually, we are already like machines, and there is machinery all around us, and that everything is already conforming, but the machines are just vastly more complicated than we have now. And just being ever so slightly ahead of the curve, and also ahead of the curve with what was socially acceptable. I mean, he admitted to the police that he was gay. He had no problems. He wasn't a campaigner for his sexuality, but it was always a part of who he was. And I think he just, when he was arrested, he wrote to his brother and started the letter, I assume you know I'm a homosexual. I was like, I had no idea. Why would they possibly know? It was just ever so slightly out of sync. And I think that's really fascinating as well, that there's that... the story of that century follows him almost exactly.
Up until the point he leaves it, unfortunately.
Up until the point he leaves it, where he decides that he just... Well, whether or not he committed suicide or not.
Yes.
And there are very convincing arguments on both sides of that. Very convincing. So
I tell you what, it's ringing several bells with other famous gay men of the 20th and indeed the 19th century. You've mentioned Oscar Wilde already. There's just a touch of Kenneth Williams in this as well, which is being in the heart of in his case, the show business firmament, but whilst also being a step aside from it. And then, and then a more obvious parallel was about whether or not there was a suicide at the end.
Yes, I mean, Alan's really interesting in that sense. I mean, they think he ate an apple that had been laced with cyanide. But Alan was an incredibly messy man.
Yes.
He used to wear a tie as a belt. He used to be covered in oil and ink most of the time from his sort of work. He looked at the world in a very different way. I mean, his bicycle at Bletchley Park, one of the sort of famous stories about him, that after a certain amount of rotation on the pedal, his chain would break. So instead of fixing the bike, he would just count the rotations and then rewind his cycling. But it meant every day he came in that he'd be covered in sort of bicycle sort of grease, and his whole life was a little bit like that. It's completely out of hair always sticking out. I'm looking complete state while we're doing this interview. So
it's a joy of radio.
I'm not one to talk.
I'm wearing a dinner suit and a top hat.
He is. So there's that side to him. So he had a room in his house in Manchester, where Wilmslow was where he was found, called the Nightmare Room, which was full of chemicals and experiments.
A laboratory, in fact.
Basically
a domestic laboratory. Yeah.
Yes, but sort of even less than that. I mean, which would spill out over the whole house. And this was a man who wasn't washing his hands regularly.
No.
And could very easily have accidentally covered something in something else. I mean, he was always, even from a young boy, was bringing tadpoles home and leaving them everywhere and being covered in stuff. And it was one of the biggest complaints of his mother was how messy he was. She took him out of mainstream schooling to homeschool him herself for a year to try and improve his handwriting. She was obsessed with it for a little while. She even went to Sherborne before he started, and whereas most mothers would be saying, my son is exceptional,
yes.
Are you going to be up to it? She was basically saying, my son is a bit odd.
Can you do something with that?
Yeah, yes. And that's what she was looking for. She was looking for them to straighten him out and prepare him for the civil service like his father was. Yeah. So it's very possible that he could have killed himself. There was no note found. I mean, there is the theory that he was killed, he was murdered by the government, which again isn't entirely far-fetched. He was making a lot of foreign holidays towards the end of his life because in British society he couldn't have the relationships he wanted. So he was going abroad and meeting men and having relationships.
Where would he go?
Well, the particular one was Norway. He met a gentleman who he wanted to bring over back to the UK, and they said he couldn't. They took his security clearance away and said they were unhappy with doing it. Because homosexuality at the time, especially for people with very high-level knowledge, was seen as a real threat. And none of his war work was public at this point.
Yeah, this is the 50s, of course, isn't it?
Yes.
When suddenly the social liberalism of the war had completely dried up. Basically, the establishment was attempting to restore the view of the world from the 30s, in a sense. Also with, I think it's been revealed recently, with a little bit of pressure from the Americans, who saw homosexuality as part of the Red Menace.
That doesn't surprise me.
So the British government and the Home Secretary were being pressed by the Americans. Because, and just for social historians here, of course, it all sort of culminates in Britain with the trial of Peter Wildeblood and Lord Bewley, I think it is.
Yes, Bewley.
Which then ultimately brings us the Wolfenden report, and then a mere 10 years later, which is speedy in British terms, we get the Liberalisation of the Sexual Offences Act.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous time for him. And after when the war finished, Bletchley Park was basically destroyed in terms of the work they did. All the machines were dismantled and burnt, all their papers were burnt, they were told not to speak about it, and people were still using the encryption machines. No one knew we'd broken it. It was the big secret. So, and obviously there were problems still around the world. We were going into other worlds, and he was an incredibly important man to the government, even at that point. So it's not completely unrealistic to think. I mean, there are so many theories going around. What's been very hard is when you're on stage, what you are always communicating something, and it is impossible to stage ambiguity.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, because it has to be overt at one level, doesn't it?
You've got to have an idea of what you're saying. And you can leave things purposefully open-ended, but you can't physically make someone do something that is ambiguous. It's almost impossible, and that's been a real challenge as to how to get around it. And we've found a way in that means that we don't have to be exactly complete there. Also, there are all sorts of other problems there, and people coming will have their own ideas, and I don't think it's for us to put an implant on it, but merely to explore the possibilities. So I think we found an interesting way of going into that, and one that I'm happy that will satisfy people from all camps, hopefully.
Yes.
Or you'll never be able to. I think we're going to run a contest for the most pedantry mistake we're bound to make. We've got a lot of mathematicians coming to see the show, a lot of scientists as well, a lot of people who knew Alan, relatives of other characters in the show. So there's going to be, I imagine, quite a lot of factual things we're going to learn as the show goes on, and if it has a future life it'll be far more factually robust by the time I've had 4 weeks of pelting from absolute lifelong experts.
But the fact that you've got so much interest, not just as you say when you announced it sort of at the back of a document, and now you've got people involved who, as you say, knew Alan. It's interesting to me that there seems to be such a sort of groundswell of support for the whole thing, which can't have been harmed in any way by the fact, as you say, it's the centenary this year, and there's an exhibition dedicated to Alan Turing at the Science Museum at the moment.
I think there's a lot of affection for Alan and his work. He's a very easy character to love as well, and as I said, he embodies so many things about that time, and I think because there are so many other people at Bletchley Park who did incredible work, and one could argue, more influential work. What Alan had was the complete full package of that story, and he is a symbol, really, for a lot of things that happened during that time, in the way that some of them don't quite fit that sort of mould. And not to say anything about the incredible, absolutely essential work they did, but there's something about his story that has that invisible fishhook to people that really brings back all the memories of when people talk about Alan Turing at Bletchley Park, they're not just talking about Alan Turing at Bletchley Park, they're talking about the 10,000 people that went to Bletchley Park at that time. Everyone from Tommy Flowers to Joan Clark to Arthur Knox to Max Newman, all these really exceptional people that people will know and you'll be able to go away and research. And when they talk about the tragedy of Alan's death, they're not talking about this one man being persecuted for his sexuality. They're talking about a whole generation lost. And
it's also about, forgive me, the slightly wider fear of being let go by society oneself in whatever form, because it is a man who's taken into society's heart, because there he is helping the country survive, let's be honest, and as you say, it's important to the government, and then for what appears now very a minor transgression, if a transgression at all, is let go absolutely and completely, and in his case to the most tragic end. And we all fear, I think, being shunned by society and our colleagues.
And
particularly randomly.
Yes, and I think it was very sad for him. And I think slowly things disappeared off, and you can see very much why people would have thought it was suicide. But you can also see why it also might not have been. So it'll be an interesting sort of story. But the more, because I think when people think about Alan, as we said earlier, that it doesn't really suit a musical, and the more you talk about it, the more you go, actually, maybe this sort of does. And as long as it's treated respectfully and done in a way that, as a salt on the story to bring out these various pieces, I think there's definitely there's a wider story to be told there somehow.
Can I ask you a slightly different question now? And it's something we touched upon before we started recording, actually, which was there are a number of musicals which are about the life story of an individual rather than an episode within an individual's life.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Evita, but there's plenty of others.
Yeah.
And you've touched upon it already in the conversation, actually, about, you do need to condense and things like
Yes.
that. What have you drawn? And I don't put it any stronger than that, but, there are forms for the narrative biographical musical.
Yeah.
And they aren't always successful. I mean, forgive
No.
me, we've mentioned Oscar Wilde, and we all know that Oscar Wilde, the musical, is one of the famous flops of all time, closing the day it opened.
I still love to see a production. If anyone's listening
Yes.
who has the money to stage a production of that, I would love to see it. I think by the sounds of reports, the only thing I know about that is there was a moment where he was in his prison cell and a choir of singing children came on. Because I'd
Why
pay
not?
to see it.
Yeah.
I'd pay to see it.
I think sometimes the press likes to just dig in anyway. So,
a little bit. I
yes.
did see The Man in the Iron Mask.
Did he like it?
Was
he in the
I
audience?
couldn't
No,
understand
yeah.
him.
You mean the play?
I couldn't
the
understand
musical.
him, which was wonderful. Yes, I mean, I've gone through an awful lot. As I was saying, I've been. The glorious thing about taking on a new form is that you can go and read all about it, and I've read huge amounts about it, all the way from Julian Wolford's book about how musicals work, through to the big Sondheim books about his lyric writing, through to watching a lot of bootleg productions of classic musicals that do this in a very different way or slightly similar way, but in a slightly different take on it. And
There's no one set way, is there? At all?
No, and to see how they're staged. I mean, there are parallels with musicals and how they seem to be put together that are very interesting, and you can sort of take them or leave them. But yeah, I mean, reading about people's criticism, something like Evita, as you sort of mentioned, and saying, well, it really knocks over the points, but you rarely get a moment of feeling like you care. Which were the big criticisms I know when it went over to Broadway, where it just feels like a series of footnotes, which I think are a little unfair, and I think we've all grown to sort of become more accustomed to that show. And
yes,
I
we
think,
had to learn to like it, you mean, in some sense.
yes. Well, I think expectation's a big thing, and I think
You mean great expectations?
great expectations. I think I think people going to Evita now know exactly what they're getting, and I think they can love it or hate it for what it is, rather than what they think it will be.
It's also got a narrator, which is actually people think of narrators in plays as a clumsy device.
Yeah.
And so very few musicals still have them.
We initially had one.
Did you?
We tried everything. Part of the fun of having a semi-devised process, you can really just go all out and try whatever you like. So we tried having originally a narrator who was part of the story. Then we tried we tried practically everything. Then having it as just a sort of straight thing where there is sort of no framing around it. And we've got something we're trying out next week, which I think is going to be the real key to unlock a lot of the stuff that sort of happens, because having to portray a man from his teens through to his sort of late 40s, not late 40s, early 40s, is a challenge on stage, and theatrically how you make that work. So we've been trying to play around with different ways of configuring that and making that sort of happen. I mean, stories where something even like Blood Brothers, there's a narrator in that, which is practically someone's whole life, and the narrator seems to be a good way of having constants through everything. We've found another constant. We've hooked onto his mother as being the person who's there throughout.
And she outlives him, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. And is a fascinating character. Absolutely fascinating. He has to tell her about the conviction, of course, and she says she doesn't really understand what's going on. She then wrote a book after he died about how incredible he was, as I said, after having gone to school in his early years and sort of been slightly ashamed of him, slightly confused by him, goes and writes this book about how amazing he is. Doesn't mention the conviction.
No.
She completely doesn't believe it's suicide either. She is completely 100% convinced, and she ransacks his house after his death. She's abroad a lot. They travel a lot, and she comes back and she ransacks the house trying to find any hint
or suggestion
that it wasn't suicide, and she finds it. She finds what she needs to find, and then after she died, the sort of anniversary of the book that she wrote came around, and Alan's brother wrote her afterwards to it saying how much Alan hated his mother, and despite the sort of book saying how close they were and how she kept up with his work and she understood it, and she's a real. There's so many. So she's a real dichotomy. There's so much to her. On one hand, she seems a very loving mother who's very interested in her son. On the other hand, someone who's completely confused and slightly afraid of what he is, and doesn't quite doesn't quite get it, and is worried that he's not quite getting it either. But the mother is there throughout. I mean, she is a constant in his life, and it is through that lens that we have at least one or two characters who can be with them throughout. Whereas Evita doesn't have that.
No.
I mean, she starts off with the man she's sleeping with, and then she meets lots of other men, and then she meets Juan Perón, and then she dies. But there's no one else following her through, and you do need someone, if you're going to say it in that way, who's going to be there with them, who can comment and who they can bounce off, and who the audience can get an attachment to.
And a still point for the character, or the character's a still point for others. But you
Exactly.
need a bounce.
You do need something, for them to knock off occasionally, and I think we've found that with her. And plus, we've got a really great actress playing Mother, so that's been a joy to write for. And we need someone, especially if Alan is going to have problems expressing himself at certain points. You need someone who is able to, and she is more than capable of expressing an opinion. So that's been really, really sort of great and sort of nice. I mean, we've been trying stuff out inspired by other pieces, and you'd be silly not to look at the sort of context you're in of how that works.
Any mechanisms you've absolutely ruled out?
No.
Oh, that's very interesting.
I mean, things we have ruled out are... I think a lot of life stories tend to be lyrically very literal in terms of almost like sort of audio descriptions for the blind,
Yes.
where there's I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and putting in dates and stuff into the songs where we haven't. We've tried to keep them as real as they can be. The musicals that we thought hadn't worked, I won't name any, but where they're almost too reverential about the people they're writing about. And we've always said we wanted to feel like we're writing about a friend that we know, or someone who can get real tangibility on, because otherwise there is no emotional connection. And we didn't want it to feel period. We didn't want that sort of Vaseline lens of history over it, which is a real distance. So you need to sort of feel like you can communicate with this now. So we've tried to shy away from clipped accents and sort of the sort of standards that you would fall back on, especially around World War II, which is so overdone really in theatre, and because it's so easy
but
to
not in
invoke.
musicals. Interestingly, actually, very few successful World War II musicals. Plenty for World War One, very few for World War II.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
I've seen a few. I've seen a few attempts.
Yeah, but I haven't. I'm desperately trying to think of an example now. I can't think of anything.
The only one I can think of that I think even vaguely works is Lionel Bart's Blitz.
I've not seen that.
Oh, and you're unlikely to for a bit. It doesn't often get revived. But it's a perfectly adequate, good one. But of course, that's all about the domestic front.
Yeah, and Cabaret, of course, is before.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the build-up to
it. So no, I think you're correct. Betty Blue Eyes after.
Yes,
yeah.
but the actual war and the fighting of the war, very, very rarely represented, and certainly I can't think of one successful musical that relates to it.
No. Touche. You're correct. There is not one.
So good luck with that, by the way. It's your next year's commission.
Yeah, the difficulty of World War II in the middle of a story is that it's such a... Yeah. The reason there are so many war films is that World War II follows almost exactly the dramatic structure of a screenplay. I mean, it does.
Yes,
you know, goodies sort of fighting against all odds, looking like they're going to lose, then turning around in the end to sort of adjust course.
I could not agree more.
Whereas putting that in the middle of something, very difficult. Trying to work out, and how do you represent a lot of it, and how do you show it? It's been an interesting one. The original thought was, I mean, maybe because people listening to this will have an interest in how musicals put together, and maybe this will be more interesting than. But
I hope so, listeners. You should be taking notes.
The original worry of that was a huge one, and originally we structured it all around the narrative of the war. So it started with him at Bletchley, and then it went backwards and forwards, and we had the beginning, middle, and end of the beginning, middle, and end of the war. But actually, there was something about it which didn't feel like it quite worked, and it stopped feeling like Alan's story. And a lot of what happened at Bletchley Park, which was exceptional, was not Alan's work. So you had that real problem as well. Whereas
also, it's an element of the war, because the problem with the Second World War is it's on so many fronts and in so many different ways, and people contributed to it in utterly different ways. Yeah. But there is no way of telling that story. No, really. So
there isn't, and especially not in a very small theatre without a cast of at least 10 million. So that was a real challenge which I think we sort of found ways of overcoming relatively quickly, and I think focusing in on the minutiae of his story is the way of doing it.
I was so interested and so pleased when you said the whole thing was about not building a distance, not making it a documentary, not making it at arm's length, but actually making it relevant for who we are today.
Yeah, and so we can key into it, and so you can watch it and go, I understand that. I think I understand what that must feel like, and it needs to be a human story. We're not making a piece of docu-theatre. Yeah. It's an emotional story about his journey.
So it's different times, but not at all different people.
Yes, exactly. And we're not that much different. And I think we all still understand the pressures they were under and the sort of world they were in. And even though the pressures and the focus is different for us now, we'll understand what it's like to be in those sorts of situations.
Yes, although, once again, we've already said there are parallels. If we live in a world entirely run by computers, and here's one of the fathers. So
exactly.
Even though it's not in place yet.
Yeah.
The way he's thinking is so modernistic that it feels absolutely not commonplace, but it feels of our time.
Yeah, we would completely comprehend what he was trying to say, and we're not even there yet to the level that he thought we'd progressed to. I mean, the Turing test, which a lot of people have heard of, is the idea that you sit in a room with a computer and you are talking to two other rooms, one of which is just a computer and another one is a man and a computer. And he said eventually we will not be able to distinguish between them. And
this is the test for artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, and to see whether or not we can converse with something that is machine but believe it is human. And we're not there yet.
No,
Siri is very close.
I've seen spam bots.
Yeah, the other people, I think, this last year, with things like the phones you can talk to, have probably spoken to technology in an unironic way for the first time.
Yeah.
And in a way not to just show off, oh look, it types what I say, because that's never really worked.
Or the bloody thing's not working, which is my tradition.
But I did it the other day. I was like, pizza takeaway restaurants near Walthamstow, please.
And it brought them up.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, I'm not even doing this sarcastically anymore. I'm really doing this. And when you consider 50 years time where that's going to be, we are heading towards it, and we are
it's the Star Trek model, isn't it, when you can actually say can you do this for me, computer? And the voice goes, yes, Captain.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. I insist that voice is the voice that
yes. There's a touch of Kenny Everett in there, I'm
there
afraid.
Is a little bit, isn't there?
Ooh, hello.
Yeah. But we're on the way to where he wanted us to be. I mean, he really foresaw eventually because originally the mechanical process of working things out were done to work out sort of physiological mathematical questions, but very soon the practical uses started to flood in, and his beliefs that eventually this is where we'd be going. He talks about the idea that the standard thoughts is that humans and plants and animals have a soul, but yet the machinery doesn't. And he said he sort of can't believe it. One day machines will be able to enjoy strawberries and cream and make someone fall in love with them and enjoy art and all of these things. And one day I'm sure we're on the way to that happening. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Isn't that interesting though the idea that we're still on the path Alan Turing set out rather than the destination? Because I think although we all know technology is changing all the time, I think we all rather egotistically assume, as humans always have, that they are the last word in evolution. Yes. Socially and technologically, and of course 10 years time you look back and you
look at us. I really hope we're not the last revolution. I think that would be a tragedy, but I think that's really correct. I think people do.
So the Universal Machine, how can people see it? When and where? Give me the details.
It's running from the 16th of April to the 11th of May, and Tuesdays to Saturdays at 7:30. And we have Saturday matinees at 3 p.m. All tickets are £15.50, and you can buy tickets from our website, which is www.newdiorama.com, which is DIORAMA.com, or you can phone our box office on 0207 383 9034.
Whereas if you speak to your computer and say, please ring New Diorama Theatre, it's not going to say, yes, Captain. Yeah. It won't do that.
Well, yours probably will.
Mine might.
You probably set that up. I don't know. You show me how.
Hello.
Yeah. And it's got a running time of probably about 2 hours, so you'll be home in time for Newsnight, which I think is so important. There's a lot of very long stuff sort of happening.
And we should just say the New Diorama is indeed a newish theatre, is it?
Yes, we hit our 3-year anniversary around this show, and when we opened up, we interviewed a lot of people who run other theatres. I think it was Tish Francis who founded the Oxford Playhouse, said your first 3 years are the hardest. So I'm hoping it's going to be much easier going as it goes on. She said you hit 3 years and you think, I've achieved nothing.
No, that's not true.
But
You've achieved still being in existence in over 3 years at some of the hardest economic times.
yes,
Of living memory, yes.
Fundraising has been very, very difficult, but absolutely necessary. And we're really happy. We're supporting a whole range of sort of companies here who are doing really well. We've had 2 international exports last year of people going out with sort of stuff they've sort of built for here, stuff tours the country. We've won 2 Peter Brook Awards for the sort of work we're sort of doing. Audiences are far bigger than I pessimistically assumed they would be, and everything's been really, really sort of wonderful.
And you're very easy to find as well.
We're
aren't
very
you?
easy to find.
I mean, you have you're almost surrounded by tube stations.
We are. We're between Great Portland Street and Warren Street tube stations, very close, walking distance to Euston and King's Cross, and also sort of Regent's Park sort of tube. And we're in a beautiful new building, which on the outside looks very shiny and sort of glassy, and inside feels like a sort of proper black box.
Yeah.
Sort of. You've seen it today during a get-in. It
Indeed.
doesn't look very posh and new as you sort of walk through at the moment. But no, we're really pleased. I mean, this is already sold out for most of the first week, I think, and a little bit of the second.
The Universal Machine.
Yeah.
So people should be thinking about seeing it.
Exactly, because we're really keen for as many people to come and see it as possible, of course, and we're excited to see what people have to say about it. We're going to announce some talks probably closer to the run that are going to be...
Right.
I know we've got a few people coming down to do some speaking sort of afterwards, so it'll be interesting to keep your eye on the website for that. We've also got a production blog which we're sort of running through, which is some insights into the rehearsal rooms. And I know we'll be upping some audio clips soon of bits of song.
So lots to see.
Lots to see. Too much, always too much to see.
So my final question to you, though, if I may, David, is that you said that you're hoping to occasionally have musicals on here at the new diorama.
Yeah.
This is your current one.
Yeah.
Have you got an inkling of what's likely to loom next in your world of musical theatre?
Well, we're doing. See, I really don't currently, for us as Pitt, as my company, we don't currently have any plans for any other musicals at this point, because this one may go so disastrously that we'll never be allowed to do one again.
It will be a triumph. So.
Yeah. We're doing another show for Edinburgh later this year, which won the Enfant Terrible Prize, and we're going to be up at Pleasance 2 in the Pleasance Courtyard doing that, which is about another Alan, a guy called Alan Conway, who pretends to be the film director Stanley Kubrick for a few years, but it's his whole life as well, but very different. That's very comic and not at all tragic.
That's this year at Edinburgh?
That's this year at Edinburgh.
Oh, right.
And we're looking at doing some big projects later next year. And I'm doing some film and television writing, but no current plans for any other musicals. We're hoping if there's enough interest in this, we might tour it out and see. Because
touring Turing?
I know. We're sort of... Someone said that we should make a post saying the Universal Machine, now Turing. Yes, but I think that's...
too obscure almost, isn't it?
It's too obscure, and I'm not sure...
It's clever, I like it.
But whether or not it would sell any tickets, I don't know. So we're hoping that if there's a sufficient interest and the show ends up being a solid enough product, that we'd be interested in maybe taking it out and sort of seeing whether they're... Because, I mean, there's a huge interest in him. It's on the national curriculum in loads of different areas, and I think there's a groundswell of interest in people wanting to know more about him. And oddly, there hasn't been much dramatic stuff about him. There's only, as you say, Breaking the Code is really it back in the sort of 80s, but there's not been much since. So it's quite exciting to be able to be making something that will be able to tell people more about someone who is really one of the sort of grandfathers of sort of where we are now.
David, it's been fabulous talking to you. Thank you very much. No, honestly,
you're the first person to say that.
No. This has been a marvellous conversation. I wish you every success with the Universal Machine. I shall try and come to see it.
Yes.
And perhaps I'll bump into you in Edinburgh as well later.
Oh yes, I'll be up for the whole time.
In which case, definitely. Then.
Yeah, I'll definitely see you. You'll have to give me some tips of what to go and see.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
But I wish you all success with this. And
thank you very much.
Thank you for speaking to us.
No problem. Thank you.
Musical talk. Well, that was David Byrne, and he was a real pleasure to meet. He was so enthusiastic. I wish I'd been recording the conversation we had before we started the interview, because he's extremely knowledgeable on musicals and also some of the intangibles about musicals, such as structure and lyric writing, which when they work well are invisible, and when they don't are painful. Anyway, David was great fun, and I do hope that I'll get to speak to him again. But let's recap on where you can see the Universal Machine. It's on at the new Diorama Theatre, which is near Regent's Park, And it's so close to several tube stations. Coming out of the theatre, I could see Great Portland Street, I could see Warren Street, and I could see Euston Square. And obviously just down the road you've also got King's Cross and Euston and Regent's Park. Very, very conveniently placed. Really, you can't miss it. And it runs between the 16th of April and the 11th of May. And it's part of the centenary celebrations for Alan Turing. Well worth going to see. And briefly, as a final little coda, I mentioned in that conversation with David the name Peter Wildeblood. Now, Peter Wildeblood was famous because, as I said, he was arrested for being a homosexual and tried and went to prison. And he was, believe it or not, the first person in British history to say in public that they were a gay man. No one had ever confessed to that before. When he came out of prison, he did many things, including becoming a gay rights activist and being very influential in the development of the Wolfenden Report, which liberalised sexuality in the United Kingdom. But he also has a link with musical theatre, because he went on to work with Peter Greenwell, who was one of the composers in residence, if you like, at the New Players Theatre, which is the great musical theatre, still there as a venue, although no longer as a concept, under the Arches, near London's Charing Cross. And with him, Peter Wildeblood worked on 3 different musicals, the first of which is by far the best known, The Crooked Mile, from 1959, which in many ways is Britain's Guides and Dolls. It's all about the seedy, slightly off-the-beaten-track world of Soho, and it's very Damon Runyon-esque. It also has one of the best songs ever written for a British musical, which is called If I Ever Fall in Love Again, which was sung by Elizabeth Welsh, that amazing performer, who fellow presenter Jonathan Cohen often worked with. That's a little coda about The Crooked Mile and Peter Wildeblood, and it's my hope to do some more research on that particular musical and talk about it at a later date. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for this universal machine, which in this case is my recording device, which I'm clutching in my hot little hands, to be turned off. So as I turn off this universal machine, I shall give you this final request to go and see the musical version of the universal machine at the New Diorama Theatre. But until we speak again, let me say goodbye, in the style of my voice-activated computer. Goodbye, everyone. This episode of Musical Talk edited and produced by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk. And here are a few outtalks of what we might call behind the herds.
It'd be a huge amount of work for you. I often say things that I shouldn't have said, but that's fine.
Well, let's see where it goes. I'm going to ask you just to give me a level, if that's okay.
Hello? Talking.
Is that the level at which you're going to speak?
I think that's the level I'm going to speak.
Fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's about right. It's nice and quiet in here, actually, which is very good.
Yeah.
What I was probably going to do, if that's okay, is it'll take as long as it takes, if that's okay. We'll start by asking you to give me... I'm going to ask you to give me your name and your involvement in the show and the name of the show. The number of people who forget that part is amazing. Yes. And then from there, we'll just take the conversation and see where it goes. Obviously, I want to talk about the show. We might briefly want to talk about the venue, because I appreciate it's new and you need to get people to be aware of it. Yeah. But let us see where the conversation takes us, because actually all we've been talking about just now has been absolutely fascinating. I appreciate that was off the record, and indeed, if we touch upon any of it again, we can do it without names, etc.
Yes.
But
I'll do it as if I haven't just espoused.
But let us see where we get. I mean, the conversation may stay strictly on the play, on the musical, but on the other hand, it may travel into the world of, but that's what the show is. So if you're happy, we'll proceed. I'll just so you know, also, I've got a little... The lighting here is not... it's fine, it's okay. And I've got a little gauge here, which means I'm going to partly be looking at that as well as looking at you. So some people would find that disturbing, but actually not looking at my face is always actually... I was
going to say, people tend not to look directly at me most of the time, so that's...
I can do that. Do you mind if I move these, however?
No, go for it. No. Get as much space as you can.
If that's okay. Sorry, I'm just...
Normally this is completely blank, so I don't know what...
You were away for a day, you told me.
Exactly. Well, a week or so now.
Oh,
We're
right.
rehearsing down in King's Cross, so I've been...
All very local then. Right. Well, if you don't mind, with your name, show, and involvement in it, and away we go.
Of course. My name is David Byrne. I'm the writer and director of Universal Machine. I should do that again, because I'm not the writer, am I?
But if you speak to your computer and say, phone new diorama computer... I'll say that again.
So if you say that,
yeah,
they'll
it
do
won't work at all.
nothing. See, we're imperfect.
I can't do it, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll start that again. Anything in that you want in or out?
No, I'm fine with all that.
It was pretty good, I thought.
I didn't
like
say
that.
anything too offensive.
No, nothing at all.
No, very, very happy with that.